So hello, everybody. Here I am, Peter Larson, the chair of the Ottawa Forum on Israel-Palestine in Ottawa, and I'm talking to Dr. David Kattenburg, who is speaking to us from the Netherlands. David, hello.
Hello, Peter.
David, you've just been in the news a bit again today because a lawsuit or a complaint that you've put in against the Ontario Liquor Board for selling wines, advertising wines as product of Israel when in fact they come from the West Bank. So congratulations to you for your success on that score.
Thank you.
Just a word, David, just so people who may not know you, you're now a Canadian. You're a Jewish Canadian from Winnipeg. You have been an active supporter of Palestinian causes, Palestinian human rights for some time. How did you pick up this issue of the wines?
Well, just to be clear, things are more complicated. I'm a Canadian-American Jewish person, born in the States with a couple of science degrees from McMaster University. I have a PhD. I teach the health science courses, microbiology. I'm also a journalist. I've been a journalist, radio journalist, and a writer for many years. And a solidarity activist. The Palestinian people are my friends. It's a long and complex story how I came to my solidarity stance vis-a-vis the Palestinian people. But I am now and have been for years, and I've been to Palestine about 7 times over the course of the last decade. First time I was there was in 1984. I wasn't a solidarity activist then. And cutting to the chase, I enjoy my wine, I must confess, and back in early 2017, I thought it'd be interesting to find out what the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, which is the largest liquor retailer in the world, I understand, was selling in the way of settlement wines. So I did a quick check and found 2 wine products that were clearly and obviously settlement wines, one from Shiloh and the other one from Sagot, which immediately I knew they were settlement wines. So I complained.
And being sold as Israeli wines.
And being sold as Israeli wines.
Yeah.
And what really angered me was that I understood what the label meant to me and what the label means for the Israelis and the settlement vintners. I know it means it for them, and I know this is what the label product of Israel means for the folks like B'nai B'rith and the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, is that this land belongs to Israel, from the river to the sea, including all of what's called the occupied Palestinian territories, Judea and Samaria, is the ancient ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. And so they want to wave that flag. And I was angered by that because it's countered international law, and the labels on the wines on the LCBO shelves indicated that Canada was endorsing that, and that infuriated me.
Thank you. That's great. Now let me look at it. This is in terms of international wine, it's a relatively small winery, or 2 relatively small wineries selling a relatively small amount of wine in Ontario, and yet the resources put in by the vintners and by the government of Israel and by the government of Canada to oppose your, on the face of it, reasonable demand that it be labeled according to international law. Help us go through each of them. Why is Israel and the vintners so determined to throw lots of money at this to be able to sell this in Canada as a product of Israel? And then a second question I'll get to in a minute, but why does the government of Canada spend hundreds of thousands of dollars also to oppose your demand? Let's go. What about the Israelis first?
Well, let me quickly state, I've just the other day got like another 1,300-page ATIP release from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, 1,300 pages about my wine case. And in there was a number which I did not write down, but it was something on the order of 300,000 Canadian dollars a year was the total value of Israeli wine sales in Canada. Now, I think it was something like that, somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 a year, which is pretty small. It's not big. I'm sure it's bigger in the United States and probably in Europe, but in Canada, it's small. And these 2 particular wines were hardly selling anything, Sagot and Shiloh. I think the reason why the Israeli government got so irate was because, well, what I said, they feel that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. They don't say that publicly. They don't say we insist that these wines be labeled product of Israel because this land belongs to us Jews and no one else. God gave it to us. That's not what they say. They argue, Canada-Israel free trade agreement. That's bogus. The reason they get angry is because they have a claim. The land belongs to the Jewish people and no one else. And they want other countries, and they want to wave that flag. And they, most importantly, want other countries to acknowledge it and endorse it. And so it's pure politics.
So it's more of about like I think it's Hasbro, I think is the word, a political thing.
Yeah, it's Hasbro, but it's also, this is their ideology. This goes really deep. And for settlement vintners like Yaakov Berg, who was the most vocal about all this, the guy who runs Sagot. I mean, he's put this on the record in the course of the various cross-examinations, that his belief that his winery sits on ancient Jewish land, the ancient ancestral homeland. He believes it. He's not faking it. He really does believe this. And to be asked to put down, something else, like is anything other than the product of Israel, is an insult to him. It's an affront. So it's purely ideological, political, and religious. And the Canadian lobby agrees. For the Canadian government, it's just purely expedience. It's pure politics. It's expedience. They, as we all know, they view the Canadian Jewish community, organized, quote unquote, Jewish community, Zionist community, the community that the CJA and B'nai B'rith Canada and Simon Wiesenthal Center and the various folks who, the community, Erwin Kotler's community, and all those good people are seriously powerful constituency. And the Trudeau government, I don't think Justin Trudeau really, one way or another, if he thought the wind was blowing another way and it was to his benefit politically to support the Palestinian cause, he'd do it. But it clearly isn't. So it's just expedience.
But based on what you've just said now, an interview I did previously with Dimitri Lascaris, the government of Canada has poured a huge amount of resources into this, meetings at the highest level, back and forth between departments, lawyers, and so on. It's not just a slight preference. They've already dug their heels in on this, as I understand it. Or am I wrong?
They went to the wall. The Canadian government went to the wall. The Trudeau government went to the wall to defend Israel's rights, to conceal the criminal origin of Israeli settlement wines on Canadian store shelves so Canadians wouldn't know. That's exactly what they did. They went to the wall to endorse, provide a tantamount implicit endorsement, not so implicit endorsement that land belongs to Israel and no one else. Because that's what Israel says, that's what the settlers say, that's what the Zionist lobby says. Canada's glad to fake it, well, to put forward the SIFTA argument, but for them it's just expediency. And yeah, they spent a lot of money doing it, and they failed miserably at the Federal Court of Canada, and then they appealed to the appeals court and they lost there, and went back to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And it's obviously the CFIA did not come to their redetermination without consulting the highest levels of the Canadian government. I am certain, without any evidence, that the Privy Council office and the Prime Minister's office, the highest levels, everybody was on the same page. The CFIA was going to say, no, product of Israel labels is not true. You can only put it down if you put in parentheses something else, and we'll figure out what that something else is down the road. So it was the easiest solution. And I'm sure that the Trudeau government said, so now I'm sure the Trudeau government is under intense pressure from the Israeli government and the lobby to go to reverse itself again. But it would be absurd. They won't do it. They're not going to force the CFIA to do it. I'm sure they're saying to the Israeli government and the lobby, don't worry, we'll finesse it.
Well, we will keep our eye on this, see how this moves forward. Just one last question here. David, you've put a huge amount of time and energy into it. I know that, I understand that your lawyer, Dimitri Lascaris, has also put a huge amount of time into it. How do you fund all this?
Well, I mean, Dmitry put in since August of 2017. Dimitri's been working almost 5 years on this pro bono, and I can't tell you how many hours, incalculable, thousands of hours, thousands of hours. If this was, as an attorney as top flight as Dmitry is doing this for money, it would have come into the millions. But he did it all for free, and costs were raised through GoFundMe. I raised a total of about 13,000 Canadian dollars through GoFundMe, and all but about 1,300 are left, and they've gone into paying for the various costs, which, photocopying and scanning and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Well, David, congratulations to you and to Dmitry on your victory here. We'll see how the Canadian government wriggles forward on this. And
the struggle continues, man. It's going to continue, because until the CFIA arrives at holds its public hearings about what should product of Israel be accompanied by on a label, until that happens later in the year, product of Israel labels by themselves don't comply with federal law and are false. And so any settlement wine on Canadian store shelf, obvious settlement wine or putative settlement wine or Golan Heights wine, is falsely labeled. If it's labeled product of Israel, it's falsely labeled. So we're going to keep them busy. We are going to keep them busy.
One thing that strikes me in this is this huge pushback by the Canadian government over labeling. This isn't even boycotting products from the West Bank, or for that matter, following the BDS line to boycott everything from Israel. These are like orders of magnitude. It looks like there's going to be a lot more struggle going forward. So, David,
if I may super quickly add that in the CFIA redetermination, one of the most interesting, the second most interesting thing in the CFIA redetermination, aside from saying the product of Israel by itself is false, was a statement that's kind of a little bit circuitous. You got to read it closely, but the CFIA has acknowledged that Canadian consumers operate conscientiously, that they exercise their conscience, not just looking for the right percentage of wine. Is this healthy? Is it really 750 mLs or is it less? Standards and weights, that Canadian consumers operate through the use of their conscience. And this is powerful, because never again will anybody in the government be able to say that consumers don't have the rights to exercise their conscience when making consumer decisions, that it's not valid or legitimate. It's not the job of the CFIA to facilitate conscious consumerism, but the CFIA has just acknowledged that consumers operate using their conscience in part, and that's legitimate. That's powerful. So without saying that they support boycotts, of course they don't.
Means they have the right to do so. That's right.
They have the right to do so.
David Kattenburg, once again, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing how this unfolds. You have a great day.
Peter Larson, you take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.